Let's do this proper, let's do this showbiz, like WWE style. Let's give a warm welcome to Tristan.
Hey, good morning. My name is Tristan Senycia, as you can tell. And today we'll be discussing product visioning and the road to development readiness. So thanks for coming out. It's pretty early and also a little bit rainy. So today I'll be telling you a little bit about myself, a little bit about the companies and projects that I get involved with, but most importantly I'll be showcasing a case study which will illustrate how all of this works in concrete terms. So just to give a quick explanation of the sort of brands that I've built in the past that sort of help deliver this type of work. So the first one I started about 3 years ago, and as you can tell it's from the UK as opposed to across in Australia. It's predominantly focused as like a product acceleration service. So it covers things that are often missed in the product development space. So things like the actual strategy piece in a lot of detail, and also validation strategy. Say you've got a product concept and you're not 100% sure about, is it a good idea? So the sort of things that we can look at is, should we do a little bit of consumer research, contextual inquiry, which is just like talking to a lot of people about your concept, and making sure that it's market aligned. Product concept testing and all that good stuff. And there's also a little bit of startup coaching in this. So the type of organizations that usually we collaborate tend to be just about to be funded or have already received funding, or sometimes we also work in collaboration with funded accelerator programs in order to deliver works, predominantly across in the UK. On the other side, we've recently created Australis Apps, which is pretty much wraps together all the good things like software development design, but has a key focus on product strategy. So that's why we call it a strategy-driven software development studio. And the difference between like a conventional software development company and ourselves are we're interested in what happens after you launch, as much as the actual development piece. Just move along. So today we are talking about Mango RV, so less about mangoes and more about recreational vehicles. So on the next slide I've got a bit of a project brief, but essentially what we were approached with is an idea of creating a platform for renting out recreational vehicles as pictured in the top right, and the target geography is Texas. So that's one of the great things about what we do. We get projects from all around the world, not just the UK, not just Australia. So this is what we were approached with in a bit more detail. We were approached by two medical professionals who are from San Antonio, and they had 4 RVs of their own, like recreational vehicles, the camper vans that people like to go and explore different parts of the state and the country with. And they had some success in renting their own out, and they wanted to sort of scale up their efforts. And what they thought of doing was creating a 2-sided digital marketplace with people that rent and people that want to rent out their vehicles. So we can note that they were making some direct sales through their own website, and they were receiving traffic from other platforms that already exist in the market in the US. But essentially they just wanted to see if they could scale it out. So originally they approached like a software development company across in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. And the software development company knew about what we do in terms of product management, and they thought we would be best placed to help advise on what sort of strategy to take forward. So the concerns that the software development company had was about market saturation, because there were incumbents, but with the caveat that these 3 major incumbents were underperforming in one way or another. They were also a little bit unclear about how to scope the first release, in line with like a commercial strategy. So just to give a quick overview about who was involved. So when you're talking about product ownership, I like to expand the term a bit and call it a product ownership team. So anyone that's not involved in only development or only delivery is part of this team. And so there are multiple stakeholders, right? So the moggers, a neurosurgeon and a pharmacist, although I do consider them still domain experts, even though they're called, from day to day they're in a pharmacy or doing surgery. They did have a legacy of a number of years of actually transacting and operating in this market, hence they're domain experts. Product development, so these two components are usually involved. So there was iTernal out of Kiev, and they're covering aspects like the IT project management, business analysis, design development, and it was quite handy that they've got this off-the-shelf type of online marketplace that they can just adapt for each of the projects, and that really helps save a lot of development hours. And then there's us, and so we filled in the gap, the missing gap, which was product strategy, validation, and doing a lot of that research that's required in order to optimize the vision. So at this stage, I just wanted to distinguish the difference between product strategist and project management. So there's quite a bit of confusion in the market in terms of what a product manager is, but I thought I'd try to break it down into its constituents. So we were engaged predominantly as the product strategists, and Eternal had a similar role called project manager, right? So those are the two constituents of product management, and it's kind of difficult to do both at the same time, like be strategy and delivery oriented, and look outside and inside of the building at the same time, and have a high level overview of the vision versus going into the details and making sure you understand all the detail flows and the implementation. And also, you need to think about these two things at the same time: commercial success and technical success. So, as a stakeholder, our responsibility is commercial success, and theirs was technical. So it was a good collaboration to foster. Another way of explaining this is idea flow from left to right. Where do the ideas originate? It's the domain expert, right? They need to come up with the idea because they've been in the marketplace and they've seen what's missing. Their ideas tend to be quite raw. They represent the user. They've got all the contacts that are required, and they just know how the market's structured. But in order to have a good outcome, it's often a good idea to sort of pass that through a strategy filter to actually understand, what sort of strategy makes commercial sense in terms of what part of the product we should think about taking to market first, thinking about release planning, and also what sort of market position are we going to take in a marketplace that already has players involved. And then on the delivery side, we still need quite a bit of feedback on how much time, cost each of these features is going to require, and a whole range of these implications and trade-offs that, as the high-level stakeholders, we don't think about that much. So, in terms of how it works, in terms of where you start from and where you get to, our involvement typically happens at the start of the projects. We look at the first two phases, feasibility and product visioning stage. So that's us there. Don't have a laser, I wish I did. Maybe I do, no I don't. And then what we do is we pass along the requirements to the designers and the developers so that they can mobilize a team and actually get a lot of the work done. But in this early phase, it's mainly about strategizing. The market tends to skip these first few phases, and now they're understanding the importance of UX UI. So instead of going straight to developers now, they go straight to designers. But there are a couple of other steps that are required to happen before. So I just thought I'd give you a quick overview, and this is a highly simplified version of the roadmap. And so this is how, from a timing perspective, things sort of fit together. So the first two are what we're predominantly involved with, which is feasibility, commercial feasibility and product visioning phase. And then, the rest are done by others predominantly, apart from sometimes the tech architecting. And so what you'll notice is that there's a combination of what we call validation and product development steps involved in this whole delivery. So if you were just to look at the product roadmap, then you would just see the product development piece. But we've actually highlighted some of the validation steps as well that are sort of interspliced. So the first one is a validation step, commercial feasibility. Product visioning is actually product development, because you're actually documenting something, which is the results of what you found during commercial feasibility in a way that designers and developers can kind of pick up and run with. And then the rest is, estimation of time and cost. I would consider that validation, because you're getting feedback from the team and you're making decisions. Tech architecting, that's going out there and working your way towards the end product. UX UI is the same, although there is some prototyping sometimes, often actually. Product concept testing is another validation, and there are a range of other types of validation that you can do, including things like consumer research along the way. But what I consider is that validation is equal to product acceleration. So the more validation you can get on the table, the more your product has been accelerated. So just looking at feasibility in a bit more detail, what is the role of it? It is to catch the white elephants. So often, without knowing, we might be wanting to develop a white elephant product. And we need to make sure that we're not going to do that, because the amount of effort required and the investment is significant, right? So during this phase, we look at the competitive landscape, we understand the market and what the consumers are doing in terms of who they're going with and why. We're looking at which models tend to be working the best. Sometimes we can get on Crunchbase or a website like this and look at how much money they've raised and what the staff count is. You can also do that on LinkedIn. You might look for a reference product, so maybe you want to replicate something in the UK or the US that you want to bring across here. That can work pretty well. Also looking at the market, seeing if it's growing, what rate, is it really serving an underserved need, and does the model work in the light of day? Because often if you put it on the table, like something is missing in the model that you're wanting to take to market. And also think about, right at the start, what validation strategy would we be applying to this scenario? So we took a look at Mango RV opportunity. We saw a growth market. We saw over demand for RVs. So there were more people wanting to rent them during during the rodeo. There are people that want to, secure themselves an RV to head out there. It was quite lucrative in the same way that Airbnb is. Per night, these things, you can charge them out for $200+ US an hour. I mean, not an hour, a night. That would be very expensive and very lucrative. The competition were there, but they were a bit clumsy. So the type of product that we saw in the market was over-engineered and expensive to maintain from a HR perspective. And it was starting to piss off both the renters and also the people doing the renting and the people giving their RV for rent. But what we also found is that they were making money with quite a simplistic website already that hadn't even seen a product designer, let alone us. and they were so it was quite an easy way. People knew that they wanted an RV, and they were willing to even use quite a simplistic website to get one. And so we took a look at the competition, and most of them are out of the US, but there was one that was out of the UK that we actually found to be better designed than the US ones, which is kind of cool, which means that we could potentially do something with that. So we went with Quirky Campers as our reference business for this particular development project. It was a much cleaner, better, simpler model. So instead of having two sides to the marketplace, we took away one of the sides. So we pretty much took custody over the RVs ourselves and made sure that they were marketed much better. And so what that did was remove a lot of development by ripping out one side of the marketplace, and then also removed a lot of the configurability and functionality of the admin panel related to that. So we just had fewer stakeholders involved as well. What we noticed with Quirky Campers though was that it was an undercapitalized business, understaffed business. Effectively, no one had really tried to scale it properly. And we also noted that the UK, and they were wanting to expand into New Zealand, which are very small markets for this type of stuff, because in the UK you've got Ryanair, or at least you used to, Ryanair and Wizz Air and all that sort of stuff that you could just fly to Paris or something. I once flew from London to Poland for £13, right? So it's really quite cheap. But I guess the psychology around Quirky Campers was they were scared off by the competition in the US because they assumed that the competition were really strong. But because we had sort of conversations with the moggers, we realized from their perspective the competition were quite clumsy, and we saw the back end of the sort of interactions that no one else gets to see. And we noted that there was a lot of confusion in the back end. So we decided that this was a good opportunity to go after. So the function and purpose of product visioning is to take us from chaos to prototype and design. And so you probably noticed if you've been through this process before, things can get quite chaotic in the front end. And so the whole purpose of doing product visioning correctly is to try to calm things down so that when the delivery team gets involved, you're not pivoting every 5 seconds. And often, that's why, research and validation piece needs to precede product development as it scales. So what did we actually do? I'll just give you a flavor of what we did because there was quite a bit. So the first thing that happened was the development company had collected quite a bit of product vision type information from the client. And what we did was go through it and mark it up and ask a lot of clarification questions and also make comments and observations. We took a bit of a broader view. So right at the start of the process, we were already thinking about the end point, the market entry point, go-to-market strategy and all that sort of stuff. So what we've sort of created is a way of documenting the go-to-market thinking at the early stage. So anticipating the challenges and making people more aware of what's coming down the line. And also have action plans that are beyond just what to develop and who to involve on the development team. Helping them set proper objectives and key results, so not expecting to go from 0 to 100 million users in one release. Allocating team members to sub-projects, so organizing a bigger project into smaller projects, and then creating a venture roadmap to sort of depict how it all fits together. What you'll notice is that the top 20 reasons why startups fail, poor products actually at number 6, so it's not even in the top 5. So this is why we sort of try to help founders with the top 5 and also the rest of the list in their thinking to balance that attention. So another thing that happened was we prepared the high-level documentation, and then Kate from Eternal turned that into a much more detailed document, which we then reviewed to actually cut anything that wasn't central to the commercial objectives, and a lot of product documentation. You're talking MVP maps, product maps, early adopter personas, canvas, business model canvases, that type of thing. There is more, but every time you do a project, you need a different set of documents to capture those initial decisions that are made. Release planning, we help them actually map their way from 4 to 20 to 50 RVs on the platform, and then also decide upon the exact type of marketplace, because marketplace is an umbrella term for many different types of marketplace, and get a time and cost estimation for all of that. So the outcome, as you might expect, was a much clearer and more compelling product vision, and much more accurate time and cost estimation from designers and developers. So at the start, if you just go to a designer and developer, often what will happen is they'll say, oh, here's a massive range that it could be, which is kind of a bit problematic if you're trying to budget, right? Plus or minus 50% or 100%. So then you don't know how much to rate. Whereas if you go through this process, you can get between plus or minus 10, 20%. We took their documentation, passed it through the strategy filter, and it underwent a lot of scrutiny, and also a lot of cross-checking against what we could find on the net. So we ended up saving them about 100K in design and development fees, resulting from false starts and the scope creep that tends to happen when you ask a client, oh, do you need this? This would be nice to have, this would be nice to have, this would be nice to have, and then you start to build something quite extravagant with no sign of an ROI in sight. So we removed the unneeded features from a commercial perspective, and we made things a lot clearer in terms of the release planning, and made sure that we called it MVP2 because they already had a product in the market that was generating revenue. So we called this one MVP2. Another thing that we managed to help them avoid is all the pivoting that typically happens when you've got designers and developers, and the product visioning changing all the time. That's kind of expensive. That's tens or hundreds of thousands sometimes. Failed launches and not knowing why as well. So it's important to know what sort of experiments you're running with each release, so that you know whether you've succeeded or not. And also looking at market alignment from the outset. So the way that we help people in terms of completing this process is for larger projects like Mango RV, we pretty much go away and just get it done, and we have workshops occasionally with the client. So it's predominantly a conversation between us and the product owner, who is the domain expert. Or for smaller projects where there's not a lot of funding available, what we can do is provide the frameworks required and sort of engage on an hourly rate to deliver them in collaboration with founders or the business owners. So what that does is it accelerates the learning process if you're going to do it on the coaching way, because you have to do it yourself. And then we critique where you've potentially not considered. We sort of point out the gaps. It's also important that particularly in the WA market, we've got +8 and accelerators like that, but there's not that many as compared with a lot of the rest of the world. And even so in the UK, for example, they've got 200 accelerators, 200 incubators, so it's crazy. But still, they need more. They're opening more. And then once you've gone through this process, you'll be much more investable, so that hence the investability thing. And it's also FFF and founder friendly, because we realize that people don't have a huge amount of cash in the early stages and need that support in order to become more investable for later raises. So FFF is the first round that you'll raise, which is friends, either fans or fools, depending upon if you're in a good mood or not, and family. That's usually where the early raise comes from, as opposed to angels or VCs, which is much further down the line. But in order to get to market, usually you'll need to do an FFF round or have a business that's generating cash. So thanks, and I'll be at the Sundowner. So you can come and chat to me there or chat to me afterwards. If you've got any questions, that's my email. You can get in touch. Keen to talk to people in the industry, designers, PMs, developers, founders, and yeah, might be able to share this presentation as well. If you haven't taken a photo of the slides, then they'll be available. And yeah, that's pretty much the end of the presentation. So thanks very much.
Are there any questions for?
Alrighty.
Not going into the dollars, what's the kind of cost share, along the different contributors that you do the product visioning, the development and stuff like that?
Yeah.
What percentage would be
Allocated to each.
to like product vision, the part the strategy part?
Yeah. Well, it depends on the project itself, but product visioning isn't that expensive typically because the more experienced you are, the quicker you can do it. So usually product visioning is cheaper than design, which is much cheaper than development. So you'd probably be saying something like 5 to 10, 10 to 15 for design, and then the rest would be developers. That would be a typical breakdown, although that could vary quite just depending on the product that you're developing. But thanks for the question, that's a good one.
Just next to the Reso, would you look at any interns or practice potential developers and others?
We typically collaborate. We have what we call high value services across in Perth and London, and then we collaborate internationally. So we're quite an internationally sort of domiciled brand. But yeah, I mean, potentially, it just depends on what the situation is, what sort of projects are available. But yeah, thanks.
Part of it is, guys, there's never an opportunity now to try and use the people that crack. If your business model is set up, even if you can have someone that's shotgunning you, right? Didn't talk about as an example DevOps or working in an agile environment, but study it until you actually living, breathing, etc. Being experienced in it, to actually see what a proper coder does as opposed to a low coder. It's really important on hindsight. The more you can try and use people and develop the same, it's going to be better, it's going to be for a right going forward. It's that kind of everyone in the village, race, child type stuff, it's the same thing, right? We want a great team during birth. There's some things that we can find it sort of right?
There could be a collaborative model there for people that are wanting to because often developers they're either looking for the really high paid corporate jobs, but often the first co-founder that I had on the technical side, he ended up taking a position with Google, right? So he's now working for Google, but he was also, because they just love collaborating on startups as well. It's a completely different challenge, right? So he was doing, I think he was working at Big Commerce at the time, but he was also developing the platform that I was creating for the construction industry across the green building industry in Australia. So yeah, there's all sorts of models that can work in sort of collaborating together. Cool.
The only thing I would say, there's always a flip side to Glenn's comment, which is if you do take on a junior or an intern or something like that, you need to invest time into them. If you don't have that time, you're not going to do either of you any justice. And that's something we learned as a company, is when we took on an intern, we kind of went, there you go, bang, just go and do your stuff, and it just doesn't work. You have to invest the time, and when we kind of learned that and we started investing, we started getting much better people and employees out of it. So again, just don't think they're going to be a cheap resource, because they're not. They're actually going to cost you a lot of effort to mentor and get them to where you kind of want them to be. And again, the same for your staff as well. Like, they can suck 25% out of your lead team, just them mentoring them. But again, remember, it's a longer journey as part of that, because then they're with you. So all the people we've invested in are still with us, but they're now much more productive employees.
That's right.
Question in the back.
So if you've got an active product in Australia, going through that product visioning and taking it to a different market, say the UK market, would you roll out that service?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, there's nothing preventing that from. We sort of work in three ways. Sometimes we do like discovery workshops. Sometimes we do the product visioning, and we also do product strategy, where we just join the team for a while as like an interim executive, and we help the team become more strategic and lay out the roadmap for internationalization, if it happens to be that. Yeah, so I've sort of collaborated with quite a number of clients in the US in particular who understand that offering. Yeah, so answer is yes. Sorry, was there a question out that side? No. Yeah.
The scenarios you go through are like used in the industry for project planning, is that? Have you looked at the issues of health, environment, safety, and quality, and for instance, even incorporating a carbon footprint, et cetera, in the decision making?
Yeah, so my first project, which was supported by what's now called Accelerated Commercialization, was a project that was focused on building sustainability. So I've always been thinking about these type of things from the very start, but it really depends on what the software is enabling, right? So there will be certain projects that we probably won't touch, because they'll be like
Blockchain.
We're gonna park that one right there, because I saw there's a couple of questions at the back. Was there one there? No, there was one there. Yeah, sorry.
With Mango RV, and I guess this would be with a lot of people that you consult with, sometimes founders can be pretty fixed in how they want to go to market or how they want to kind of execute. Like, they want advice, but then they've got a few little things they're clinging to versus that.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of that with Mango working with their founders, and how you managed to convince them of a better way?
Yeah, so effectively what happened was there was a sales rep for Eternal across in Austin, Texas, and came across this couple, quite a mature couple though, so it tends to be the more mature people that are able to hear what we're saying, you know what I mean? So it is a function of experience. So when you first start your startup, you know, you've got a lot of learning to do, and it just depends on your level of receptivity. So yeah, that's one of the criteria that we sort of have internally for working with people. Are people receptive to that? And if they're not, then, I mean, founders can, it's a collaborative effort. It's not like we're saying, do it this way or die. We're listening to what the founder is saying as well, because they're hopefully the domain expert. So it's very collaborative in that sense. But I do take your point. There's a lot of founders that we've come across that are very fixed in their idea and like, no, we need developers involved now, yesterday, and we're going to raise like $5 million tomorrow. There are people like that, but usually over the course of time, people grow and they can see nuance in how to collaborate.
Just wondering, how involved are you throughout the entire development process? So, I mean, a lot of that was kind of almost waterfall-y, where you've got all of the visioning up front and you're speaking to customers and things. When you go into development, you know, what we're usually told is it's all very iterative. You do a little bit and you implement it, you get feedback, you talk to customers, and it's back and forward all the time.
Yeah.
Just wondering, how involved are you guys throughout the whole process?
That just depends on the validation strategy that we put forward. So sometimes if there's product concept testing, then we'll take that opportunity to do some more learning at that stage before developers get involved. Yeah, so there is a lot of front-end activity on the validation and the strategy. That is true. So our involvement progressively drops off, right? So you can have us on for a meeting, once every week or once every month as required. But often what we do is, how I split product management into those two roles, product strategist and IT project manager. There's a little bit of a handover between those two parts of the role, if they're two different people. And then we will just occasionally oversee the projects if the founder sees value in that. Yeah.
Okay.
Good question. Any other questions, guys?
I was just going to ask a question from your experience on investing and seeing companies go through. Like, do you see a pattern to the companies that do get investment from the idea through to getting that seed funding? Is there a cookie cutter that could be applied?
In general, we like to focus on sales traction as our primary KPI. Like, how do we reduce the amount of cost in order to get early sales or early sales growth? But in reality, when it comes to raising cash, it tends to be who you happen to know, right? Who happens to be in your network and their sort of previous experience. So the US is a place that you can get a lot of cash from because people have already got a lot of experience in this type of area, and they've got an appetite for investment. So sometimes you can have a completely shocking product and you can get a lot of investment for it if you talk to the right people. And that's the sort of the sad truth. But often what will happen is that one of the clients that we've worked with in the US managed to raise 600K USD, and then realized that something was missing, and that was the strategy part. So he brought us on, and we sort of redirected the venture within about 5-6 weeks, and now they're back into development again on a much more focused path, right? So that's what we can help with as well, like pivoting and micro-pivoting in a way that makes more commercial sense. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much. Any one last question, Tom? No? Thank you very much. Oh, go on, Molly.
Sorry, hi, I'm Brani, I'm Product and Insights Manager. I've got a question for you. In terms of laying out the roadmap, how are you validating that as the product develops?
Validating the roadmap.
Yes.
The roadmap tends to evolve quite rapidly, and that's based on in that chaos phase, you'll see a lot of jostling around. So you do a bit of research, then you'll have a question about something, and then go and find that answer and all that sort of stuff. So it's a little bit of a discovery process. The roadmap tends to settle down after you've completed that feasibility and product visioning stage. But it's still subject to some shifting as we learn more. But yeah, so we do part of the roadmap validation, if that's what you're calling it. And then it's sort of handed over to those that can do the time and cost estimations, which tend to be developers and IT project managers. So we've all got our own role in this.
Is there a matrix to which ones go ahead of others? Like, e.g., if you've got a whole stack of your customers and giving you feature wise, is there a method that you would prioritise those on?
Yeah. Okay. So here's an interesting one. So we typically would work with domain experts already, right? So they would be part of the team. So you've got representation from the buyer and the seller side from the outset. And sometimes what we will do is we will have two or three of them on the team at any given time and take their viewpoints on board as the early adoption group, and then maybe expand that out as we near a market. But effectively what we're wanting to do, which is coming to the answer, is to get them to prioritize and then also see what the market is rewarding. So for example, for one of our products, that we're collaborating with. They have about 12 or 13 businesses all mixed together, and we had to decide which category we're going to participate in, right? And so we chose sourcing, which is an area that the Beecham Group would be very familiar with, as the core functionality to go after. And we pretty much were able to postpone much of the rest. And so we sort of validated that with the domain experts that we had, and also the growth rate of that category. So that tends, we take into account a lot of different variables when looking at that. So there's no off-the-shelf matrix that you can, we do try and score them, but the scoring process is always custom to the scenario, the go-to-market scenario, and the state of the market. So.
Was that one last one? Thank you very much. We have this space until 9 o'clock. Those of you in chairs, we're going to be rooting around trying to put this place back, so apologies in advance for kind of asking you to move and whatnot. But use this space wisely, use this now networking. We'll be back here in 2 weeks when we will have.
We have Olivia Humphrey from Canopy in the next 2 weeks. So if you don't know her, she moved to San Francisco around the same time I did. Then came back to Perth last year, which was infinitely more successful in San Francisco than ours. But she runs a company called Canopy, and it's kind of like Netflix, but documentaries and things, and you use your library card to rent those movies online. Did really, really well, sold the company to a private equity firm, I believe, and now she's back in Perth doing investing, and she's now the EIR at the Girton Ignition program. So yeah, she's a great person. She's going to talk about how to scale a business quickly and also how to overcome imposter syndrome.
Oh,
so yeah, it's going to be a great talk.
Everyone suffers from that. Yeah.
Don't forget, Voltage Espresso, once we shut this down, and found a sundowner tonight, so that's no man. See you there.
Thank you very much.